down imagings and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ, and having a readiness to revenge all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. The apostle repeats the word flesh 3 times in verses 3 and 4. It is important to discern what Paul meant by this term. While flesh can mean sinful nature, in this context it probably means literal flesh and blood. Or by the principles of the material world, Paul was thus reminding us, his Corinthian critics, that he and they were still in the material world and must to some degree operate by its principles. Paul was admitting what was also true of his critics. He was walking in the flesh, living in this material world. It is at this point that Paul made an important distraction. We are not waging war according to the flesh. This is the crucifix of the distraction between Paul and his distractors. Paul's weapons of war are mighty through God. The strength of Paul's weapons are essentially spiritual, not devices of this material world. The Corinth's troublemakers were depending upon ridicule, impressive resumes, and personal charisma. The real test of a weapon is the efficiency in battle. In verse 4, Paul declares what his weapons could do. They could pull down strongholds. The image of a especially fortified position in a walled city, which could be defended by relatively few soldiers. When a city was attacked and the walls breached, there would still be the stronghold to retreat to. This same image is used in Proverbs 21, verse 22. Paul was saying that even the strongholds that unregenerate men or the devil may erect are no match for the apostles' arsenal. We should note that Paul wrote the imaginations, those things that exalt themselves against the knowledge of God, and every thought. All of these expressions touch on the inner lives of men and women. Paul was saying the weapons of his warfare can, through their divine power, challenge and change people from the inside out. The implied questions is, what do the critics in Corinth have that can begin to compare? Verse 6 may not be all that clear to most of us. Paul was saying that he was fully willing to exercise discipline on any who were yet to repent. The second phrase of the verse is is the cooperation of the majority to disciples themselves. Essentially, this is a glimpse at the pastoral heart of Paul. He wanted to give all the Corinth Christians every opportunity to deal with the issues in the church for their Paul's prideful opponent to humble themselves and to repent. In verse 7, this is getting into where the question is the authority of Paul. Where the question. Do you look on things after the outward appearance? If any man trusts to himself that he is Christ, let him of himself think this again, that as he is Christ, even so are we Christ. For though I should boast somewhat more of our authority, which the Lord has given us for edification and critics of Paul were claiming that they were Christ. Did they mean by this that they had a special relationship with the Lord, which Paul did not? Some have even suggested that the implication is, we are Christ, but we wonder about Paul. So they've given Paul a hard time, and this Prince are.
Yeah.
I don't know how he's not give up on him yet. I guess his relationship with the Lord's reason he's not give up on the Corinth people. That whether they question his salvation or not, they certainly question his authority over them. This was the end result of their trust mentioned in verse 7. This word means to have been persuaded. What led to their conviction of their status with the Lord? The text does not say, but for reason best known to themselves, they were certain that they had Christ's authority, and they were equally as important as the original Galilean apostle. While Paul was not, the apostle said his critics should take a second look at this. Paul wanted them to look at the obvious fact. So even this, and this is what's in the verse, it says, even so are we Christ. While Paul clearly was clearly uncomfortable with boasting, he did not boast. He did boast in the beginning of verse 8. And it says, Paul was a man with authority. But this is not something that he simply imagined or was granted to him by the church. It was authority that the Lord had given him.
Yeah.
What an irony that Paul's opponents were doing just the opposite with their self-proclaimed authority. So they was claiming that they was given authority by the Lord, so was Paul. So it was kind of a, who's got the authority here is what's giving him a hard time. They were not building up the Corinth church, but themselves. That was the difference between Paul and Corinth that was doing that. Paul was trying to build the church, and they was trying to be the church. The destructive power of that pedestal authority that they were turning on Paul, not against the concept, the challenge of God, Paul closed with the assertion, I should not be ashamed. No, that should be all of us, right? Some suggest this should be a rendering put to shame. A shame is something like being considered as convicted, impostor, or presumptuous boaster. Paul did not stand idly while not only his apostolic authority, but also the Lord who gave him the authority was attacked. In a sense, the 2 Corinthians chapter 10 through 13 answers the assault. So answering the accusers, accusing Paul for not having authority. This is the next few verses. Verse 9, that I may not seem as if I would terrify you by letters. For his letters say they are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech contemptible. Verse 11, let such an one think this, that such as we are in the word by letters, when we are absent, such will be also indeed when we are present. The word, I guess, constable, the meaning of that word is worthless, disgraceful. That's what the definition of it is. But in here it says that the word means despise or look down upon. One sign of pastoral love is just how much the preacher will put up with from his congregation and not respond with anger. definitely did. In verse 10, he was repeating one of his critics' accusations by him. His letters are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech contemptible. We cannot know what bias and fact the accusations might have had. Some suggest that Paul may not have been much to look at, and people are always impressed by the attractive than the unattractive, especially in the carnal Christians at Corinth. Do y'all know what they were saying? Paul was ugly. Is what they said. They said Paul was ugly. He wrote real strong letters, but when he got it to preach, he wasn't much to look at. People didn't want to sit there and listen to it and look at it because he was ugly, or they thought he was ugly. And is it human nature? Would you rather? Do you feel more? Now, be honest. Be honest with yourself. If a man or a woman comes to their stands and they're ugly, you can give them your full attention. But if they come up here and they're attractive, you're attracted to them, you can give them your full attention, right? Is that not human flesh? Yeah. I mean, that's the truth. That is. I'm speaking the truth. And that's what was going on with Paul. His letters were strong. People read his letters when we read his letters. But when he would get up try to preach out, people didn't want to give him their full undivided attention because they didn't think he looked right. That's just what they see. You know, sometimes it gets us wandering off from preacher, Steward preacher.
No way.
There is something in an accusation of hypocrisy in the contrast between Paul's letters and both his appearance and speech. In the critic's estimation, Paul could be as bold as a lion when writing, but when he had to face him, he would be more of a house cat. So it was real funny. He was probably soft-spoken, kind of, I would say. But when you read his letters, it was real bold, and then when he got up and spoke, it was kind of, I guess, I don't know, some of us don't have it, some of us do. I mean, it's just, I guess he just didn't have a real outward voice, a real strong voice. Well, would you say, preacher? How you put that? How would you put that?
I took it that, you asked me, I took it that they were saying, you bold in your living when you don't have to face us. But when you before us, you cow down with your word, you know, and that's what the way, I didn't know it was ugly.
Well, that's what my notes is giving me.
Yeah. but, brother, I'll be honest with you. Your ministry, you take it serious. And all of my ministry, until we were in these lessons, I didn't know Paul went through so much at Corinth. Everywhere he turned, he was fighting a battle with the people that profess religion, salvation. And he was saying, he was trying to tell them in a kind way, in a meek way, you're being hypocritical. You just cause you think you got a big status, man, there ain't no big guys. God's in control.
Well, that's what he's trying to explain to them, and I think some of them claimed the Lord was in control, but they was, and I'm assuming it probably happens to a lot of preachers. I know that happens to a lot of preachers, especially these big preachers on TV and stuff. You know, I'm not to say they don't start off being for the Lord and the Lord wanting them to do good works, but then when the money and the fame and all that starts rolling in, it gets to their head, and they just kind of
Brother Ryan, I'd like to tell something, if I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've always prayed, and I say, God, help me to be humble. And this is what Paul is doing in our lesson. He's being an humble servant of God. And he has took so much. But I also pray, God, let me stand upon your word and what's right. And I'm not as meek and as Paul was. And I remember my first church, I was still a licensed preacher, wasn't even ordained yet. And I went to this church, and there was this rich guy that went there. And he told me, he said, man, you just what this church needs. Somebody that's humble and will tell them the word. You just what this church needs. Well, after I left for lunch, he told one of the upstanding members, he ain't what y'all need here, he's too much of a crybaby. And I guess God didn't make me humble enough. But that night he came back, and I preached, and I told him, and he was there. I might be a crybaby, but I got enough backbone to look a man in the eyes and tell him what I think.
Amen.
And I was being, and that was my retaliation.
That's right.
I was wrong to do that. Paul was saying, I'm gonna be humble
I'm gonna be
and work
meek.
with y'all.
Yeah.
And anyway, when I read this lesson, I said, oh me a lot of times,
Yeah.
because I've come up short.
Yeah, well, I think it's, this lesson is trying to, the passion part of
Yeah.
Paul and how he was when he done it.
Yeah.
You know, when he was trying to build the church, it's kind of, it's his defense to them, the reason he's a good pastor.
Yeah.
Is what he's trying to get across to them. So,
I know you probably ain't got to it yet, but I like the part where he said, I want to go beyond,
yeah, that's.
spread out.
Yeah.
But
That's,
I can't leave y'all, you're such a babies and whining and crying and wanting me to burp you and all like that, you know. Well, he didn't say it in them words, but.
We'll move on to the, verse 12. Any verse, we got 18 in this chapter, or this list, 18 verses?
Yeah,
Verse 12.
lesson starts with 13 in court.
In accordance, okay. Verse 12. This is evaluation of self. These, next few, this verse itself is saying, for we dare not make ourselves of the number, or compare ourselves with some of the that command themselves, but they measure themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves
Yeah.
are not wise. As we noted, Paul's critics had leveled a number of charges against him. In chapter 10 through 13, we get not just Paul's defense, but his counter charges against him as well. The first implied criticism of the false teachers is that we are condemning themselves. Paul refuses to permit condemnation to be defensive. These men were all about letters of recommendation and perhaps were a sort of a mutual admiration society. The apostles concluded that those doing this are not wise. The word rendered wise means to comprehend or to grasp. This commanding of themselves also brings up a second criticism from Paul. By their comparing themselves among themselves, they were evaluating themselves according to the measure of the rule which God hath distributed to us, a measure to reach even unto you. Verse 14, for we stretch not ourselves beyond our measure, as though we reached not unto you. For we are to come as far as to you also in preaching the gospel of Christ, not boasting of things without our measure, that is, of the other men's labors, but having hope when your faith is increased, that we shall be enlarged by your according to our rule abundantly, to preach the gospel in the regions beyond you, and not to boast in another man's line of things made ready to our hand. So, a key term in this section is measure, occurring in verses 13 and 15, the term measure or dimension. The question is, what measurement did Paul have in mind here? Some suggest that Paul was saying, while the members of his opposition in Corinth were allowing their ego to drive their boast, the apostle would not do so. Others have suggested Paul was speaking of the prominently Gentile nature of the church. He was the apostle of the Gentiles. And this was recognized by the leadership of the church according to Galatians 2, chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. Was Paul speaking of his critics as a group of intruding Judaizers? If they really were from Judah, they would have been aware of the decisions of the apostle on this matter. These interpretations are possible. More than one scholar ties this verse 12 where Paul wrote the evaluation of the wrong standard. If this is correct, then Paul's thinking was that he was not boast beyond the measure of the rule which God hath distributed to us. To say it more a different way, Paul was fulfilling the calling God had given him. The implication is that his opposition had no such divine call. This becomes more clear as we look at the first part of verse 15. Paul was saying that he was not boasting of other men's labors. He was precisely what his opposition was doing. The apostle had done the hard work of founding the church. Now the critics were seeking his turn against Paul and ultimately the gospel he had preached. So they were trying to go off his labor. In verse 17 and 18 is the evaluation by the Lord. But he that glorieth, let him glory in the Lord. For not he that commandeth himself is approved, but whom the Lord commanded. Paul summed up his thoughts in the last two verses of chapter 10, the word render. Glory in verse 17 is the same Greek term that had been translated as boast earlier in the chapter. What is the Christian to glory boast in? Paul said, let him glory in the Lord. This is an allusion to Jeremiah chapter 9, verses 23 through 24. So we got through all the verses. How did Paul approach the whole question of authority in verse 1? Meek and gentleness of Christ. That's what he was saying in verse 1. That's how he questioned authority. What did Paul say the weapons of our warfare are capable of doing? What did he say they could do? They could pull down the strongholds. Paul figure if fortitude through thought pattern, ungodly belief, or reoccurring behavior that contradicts divine truth. That's the spiritual part of that, mental habit controls a person. According to verse 8, what was the purpose of the authority? Purpose for the authority Paul was granted. Edification, uplifting, instructing, improving someone morally and intellectually or spiritually is what he was, Lord give him. What is the fallacy of measuring themselves by themselves? This highlights the danger of creating a self-serving standard of righteousness. Self-serving standard of righteousness. And you serve yourself, not wise. Paul wrote, being enlarged by the Corinth church in verse 15. What does it mean, and is it possible for churches today to do the same? Paul wrote, enlarged by the Corinthian church in verse 15 means that he hopes Corinth's faith matures, his ministry spheres of influence will expand, allowing him to preach the gospel in many regions further away. Does anybody got any questions? Preacher, I know you got something.
If I would have been Paul,
Yeah.
I would have told them people at Corinth, and that's what they were doing, bragging on themselves, brother.
Mm-hmm.
They were saying, hey, I'm as mighty as you. I mean, you know, I got the same authority you got. Look what a success I've done, and that's what he was saying. I would have said, he who toots not his horn
Yeah.
will not get his horn too bad when the tooting time comes.
That's right. That's right.
And that, I mean, you know, what does the rich man do? I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my barn. I will build great barn. I'll say to that's what they were doing in Corinth.
Yeah.
And brother, right until these lessons, I didn't really realize Paul went through so much trying to organize the churches at Corinth.
Yeah.
And he went through nearly torment. And I couldn't stop with today's lesson. I read next week's lesson too.
Yeah.
But that's when it gets really good. Paul tells them about what authority he had to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey.
It's hard to. It's like you come into the church.
Yeah.
Every week and getting up here and trying to preach us the gospel, and us arguing with you.
Yeah.
The whole time you preaching about what you preach.
They kicked against everything he tried.
Everything.
I mean,
And
all of my ministry, I didn't know that.
And it was all about. And they claim they had authority too.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess that's kind of what those y'all, that's what some people was questioning. Did they have the authority or did Paul have the
Yeah.
authority? Paul was trying to say, he's trying to teach like Christ said, meek and gentleness. If he taught like what
Who do
Christ
you
said.
think you are coming in here and telling us what to do?
Yeah.
But ain't we like that today too?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm just as good as they are. Why do I wanna go to church out there? I'm just as good as people go to.
Yeah.
And I've heard that all my life.
Oh, yeah.
You said that.
Yeah, I said that.
Yeah.
But it's a good lesson. I'm telling you,
Was good.
the more I learn about the Apostle Paul, and I'll be honest, in my shortcomings, I did not know and realize until this court meeting how much Paul went through trying to organize the churches at Corinth.
Do you think you could have done that?
Huh?
Do you think you could have took your ministry and done that? It'd been hard, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It would have, brother,
I mean,
because
it'd be hard for anybody, especially,
until we go through what we'll
Well,
do.
you got to think too, you know, he went from killing Christians and being one of the worst.
Yeah.
And then you come up here, you're gonna teach us, you know, I'm sure it was probably very hard. It'd be hard for me for
Yeah.
a guy that was, just say a guy that was atheist. And the Lord called him to preach.
Preach.
And I ain't gonna say it couldn't happen. He called him to preach. He'd come up here and go to preach, and it would be hard for me to sit here and listen to him. It would, I'd have to really pay attention.
Yeah.
I couldn't come here and slack. I'd have to pay attention to make sure, you know, it would be hard.
Brother,
And I'm sure them people was the same way.
The Sunday school lesson is for us to learn.
Yeah,
Right.
And I have to say, brother, I have learned
Yeah.
yeah,
in these lessons.
You even learned he was ugly.
yeah, see
I
that?
didn't know that.
Yeah, well, that's what, you know, in our teacher's book, there gives you some, what some other people thought, you know, some other scholars, what they discussed. I thought that was pretty good. And with the way they put it, I know that's probably right. I mean, you know,
It'd be bad to put a bag on your head to preach with.
yeah, it would be bad. But I mean, that's just human nature. I mean, if you're attracted to someone, you're gonna have to be more attentive to what they saying than somebody you're not attracted to.
Hey, good job.
But he was just real quiet.